The ranch sat alone on the edge of the Wyoming plains, quiet and still like time itself had stopped moving there. For 20 long years, Samuel Hayes had lived in that silence. The house, once full of voices and laughter, had turned into a place of echoing memories. The wind passed through the empty halls, carrying dust and the faint smell of old hay. The man who owned it, once strong, loud, and proud, now lived more like a shadow. Every morning Samuel woke before the sun. His routine never changed. He would boil black coffee, drink it in silence, then walk out to the barn where his 2 remaining horses waited. The sound of their breathing was the only life around him. He would feed them, check the fences, and fix whatever needed fixing. He didn't talk to anyone, not even to himself. He didn't listen to the radio. The only sound he liked was the crunch of gravel under his boots. The people in the nearby town knew his story. 20 years ago, a blizzard had taken his wife Clara and their son Matthew. They had gone out to bring in the cattle before the snow hit hard. Samuel had found the horses later, frozen near the creek. Clara and Matthew never came back. Since then, the rancher's smile vanished like warmth in winter. Folks tried to reach out. Pastor Miller had visited him many times in the early years, bringing food or asking him to come to Sunday service. Samuel always thanked him politely, but never came. Old friends invited him to the town fair, the rodeo, or even to dinner, but he always found a reason not to go. After a while, people stopped asking. They said it was better to leave him alone. In town, everyone recognized his name, but few remembered his voice. When he came for supplies, he would walk into the general store quietly, nod to the shopkeeper, and take what he needed: flour, coffee, nails, and sometimes feed for the horses. He rarely said more than a few words. The shopkeeper's son once said, "Pa, that man looks like he forgot how to smile." His father had sighed and replied, "Son, some people lose more than we can ever imagine." Back at the ranch, the days all felt the same. The sun rose, the wind blew, and the sky stretched forever. Samuel would sometimes sit on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, staring at the wide horizon. That horizon had once felt like freedom to him. Now it only reminded him of everything he lost. At sunset, when the sky turned gold and red, he often whispered his wife's name under his breath, "Clara," as if the wind might carry it to wherever she rested. The house inside was neat but cold. Every photo of his family had been turned face down long ago except one, a small picture of Clara holding baby Matthew in her arms. He kept it beside his bed. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, he would touch the frame as if touching her hand again. He didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up years ago. What replaced them was quiet emptiness. The townspeople talked about him now and then. Some said he was bitter. Others said he was simply tired. But there was one truth they all agreed on. Samuel Hayes had forgotten what joy felt like. Even his animals seemed quieter around him, moving slowly, careful not to disturb his silence. Yet there was a part of him that still remembered love. When spring came and the grass turned green, he would sometimes fix the old flower bed by the porch. He didn't plant anything anymore, but he still cleared the weeds. Maybe it was habit, or maybe it was his way of honoring Clara. Once a small wildflower grew on its own near the steps, yellow and bright. Samuel had looked at it for a long time before walking away. He wasn't cruel, just distant. There was still a kind heart buried under the years of grief, but no one had seen it in so long that even he doubted it existed. He believed his time had passed, and the world had moved on without him. One afternoon, the sky turned gray and a windstorm started rolling in from the west. Samuel was mending a fence post when he heard something strange, a faint tapping sound on the wooden gate near the road. It wasn't the wind or an animal. It was gentle, rhythmic, like someone knocking. He frowned and walked toward it, brushing dust off his gloves. At the gate stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her hair was tied in a messy braid, and she wore a light blue dress that looked too thin for the weather. She held a small walking stick in one hand and a folded envelope in the other. Her face turned slightly toward his footsteps, but her eyes didn't follow. They were open yet distant. Samuel understood right away. The girl was blind. He stopped a few feet away, unsure what to say. She smiled softly in his direction and asked, "Are you Mr. Hayes?" Her voice was calm and gentle, carrying a strange warmth he hadn't felt in years. "Yes, I am," he replied slowly, his voice rough from disuse. "Who are you, child?" "My name's Emily," she said. "I have something for you." She held up the envelope, her hand trembling slightly. Samuel stepped closer and took it carefully from her small fingers. The paper was old, yellowed around the edges and tied with a thin ribbon. He asked, "Who sent this?" "My mother told me to bring it," Emily said. "She said it belongs to the man who never smiles." The words hit Samuel like a stone. He froze for a moment, staring at the letter in his hands. He hadn't been called that, not to his face, though he had heard whispers. He cleared his throat and asked quietly, "Your mother? Does she know me?" Emily tilted her head. "I think she said you were a good man once." The rancher didn't know what to say. The wind blew stronger, lifting dust from the road. He looked at the girl again. She stood patiently, trusting a stranger completely. He couldn't send her away. "Come," he said finally. "You shouldn't be out here in this weather." He opened the gate and guided her toward the porch, letting her hold his arm. Her small hand felt light and soft, yet her steps were sure. When they reached the steps, he helped her sit on an old wooden chair. He went inside and returned with a cup of warm cocoa, unsure if she even liked it. But it was all he had. "Thank you," she said, smiling as she held the cup with both hands. Samuel sat across from her, the letter still unopened in his rough hands. He looked at her again and asked, "You came all this way just to give me this?" "Yes," she said simply. "It was important." The sky darkened further and thunder rolled in the distance. Samuel stared at the letter, his heart beating slower and heavier. There was something familiar about it, the paper, the handwriting on the front. He brushed his thumb over the name written there, Samuel Hayes. The letters looked old-fashioned, written with care. For a moment he felt dizzy. He hadn't seen that handwriting in 2 decades. He didn't open it yet. Instead, he looked back at Emily, who sat quietly, listening to the wind chimes on his porch. She seemed perfectly at peace, as if she wasn't just delivering a letter, but something greater, a message from the past. For the first time in 20 years, Samuel didn't feel completely alone. The storm around them rumbled, but inside his chest something small began to stir again, a feeling he thought had died long ago. And it all began with a blind girl holding a letter at his gate. The rain started to fall softly, tapping on the porch roof as Samuel sat across from Emily. The old rancher kept turning the letter in his hands, afraid to open it yet unable to let it go. The girl sat quietly, her little fingers wrapped around the warm cup of cocoa. Her calmness surprised him. Most children would be nervous around a stranger, especially a man like him who barely smiled. But Emily didn't seem afraid at all. It was as if she had known him for years. Samuel finally spoke, his voice slow and rough. "How far did you walk, child?" "Not too far," she said with a small smile. "Mama said the ranch was past the tall windmill." I counted my steps and followed the sound of the wind. Samuel frowned slightly. "Your mother let you walk all the way here alone?" Emily nodded. "She trusts me, and she said good people live here." Her answer caught him off guard. No one had called him a good man in a very long time. He felt a strange tightness in his chest but quickly looked away. The rain got stronger, and he stood up to pull the screen door shut. "You should wait until the rain stops before you go back," he said. "It's not safe." Emily tilted her head toward the sound of his voice. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." He nodded, though she couldn't see him. For a while, they just listened to the rain. Samuel stared at the letter again. His hands trembled slightly as he untied the small ribbon. The paper crackled when he unfolded it. His breath caught when he saw the handwriting. It was unmistakably Clara's. The loops, the careful lines, the way she wrote his name. Everything was hers. He could barely read the first words through the blur in his eyes. "My dear Sam." His throat tightened. He hadn't heard her voice in 20 years, yet now, as he read the words, it felt like she was whispering right beside him. Emily, though she couldn't see his face, seemed to sense his silence. She asked softly, "Is it from someone you knew?" Samuel tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. He cleared his throat and finally said, "Yes, from someone I loved." Emily's small hands rested on her lap. "Then it must be very special." He nodded again. "It is," he kept reading. The letter was dated just 2 days before the blizzard that took her away. It said, "If this letter ever reaches you, Sam, it means time has passed and you've forgotten how to smile. I hope you still have the ranch, the horses, and that stubborn heart of yours. Don't lose it. Life will hurt, but don't close your heart to the world. Someone out there will need your kindness one day." When that happens, help them, and you'll find me again." Samuel closed his eyes. The sound of rain faded. All he could hear was her voice in his mind. She had written this before she even knew what was coming. Maybe she had felt something, some strange knowing that he would need her words to survive. Emily's voice broke the silence. "Did she tell you something nice?" Samuel smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth trembling. "Yes," he said quietly. "Something very nice." Emily seemed satisfied with that answer. She took another sip of her cocoa and asked, "Mr. Hayes, why don't you smile anymore?" The question hit him deep. He looked at her, wondering how to explain years of pain to a child who couldn't see his face. After a moment, he said softly, "Sometimes when people lose too much, they forget how. It's not because they don't want to, it just disappears." She nodded as if she understood. "My mama says smiles never disappear. They just hide until someone finds them again." He looked at her for a long time, then let out a slow breath. "Your mama sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Emily said proudly. "She tells me stories about people who forget to live. She says maybe I can remind them how." Samuel stared at her in wonder. She was blind, yet she saw more clearly than most people he knew. There was something about her, something peaceful and pure, that made the heavy air around him feel lighter. The rain began to slow, turning into a soft drizzle. The wind had calmed, and the evening sky glowed faintly with light breaking through the clouds. Samuel stood up and said, "You should probably start heading home before it gets dark. I'll walk you part way." Emily shook her head. "No need, I know the path, but thank you for letting me rest." He frowned. "It's muddy and slippery. You could fall." She smiled, raising her walking stick slightly. "I've walked in worse. Don't worry, Mr. Hayes, I can find my way." He couldn't argue with her courage. Still, he said, "At least take my lantern. It's getting late." He placed an old lantern in her hand and lit it for her. She smiled. "You're kind. I'll bring it back." He hesitated, then said, "You can keep it if you like." "No," she said with a grin. "You'll need it when I visit again." That sentence stopped him. "Visit again?" he asked. "Yes. I want to know if the letter made you smile." Samuel didn't know what to say. He felt something stir in his chest again, something he hadn't felt since long ago. Hope, small and uncertain, but real. As she turned toward the road, he followed her a few steps until she found the direction herself. Her stick tapped the ground in steady rhythm. She moved carefully but confidently, guided by instinct and sound. When she reached the gate, she turned her face toward him and said, "Good night." "Mr. Hayes, I'll come when the sun feels warm again." He stood there, watching her small figure disappear down the road, her lantern glowing softly like a firefly in the mist. The world felt strangely quiet once she was gone. The ranch seemed less empty than before, as if her presence had left behind a trace of light. That night, Samuel sat at his kitchen table for a long time. The letter lay in front of him. He read it again and again, memorizing every word. The handwriting brought back memories. The smell of Clara's cooking, the sound of her laugh, the way she used to hum when she worked in the garden. He could almost hear her now, telling him not to give up, not to live like a ghost anymore. He finally folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the old family photo on his nightstand. Then he looked around the quiet room. For the first time in years, he noticed things he had ignored. The dust on the shelves, the cobwebs near the lamp, the broken chair by the fireplace. It suddenly bothered him. He wanted to fix it all, to make the house alive again. He picked up a rag and started cleaning, not because he had to, but because it felt right. It felt like he was preparing for someone to come back, not Clara, but maybe something she wanted him to find. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The air smelled fresh the way it did after a storm. Samuel stepped out on the porch and looked at the empty road. The windmill creaked softly in the distance. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with cold, clean air. For years, he had felt nothing but emptiness, but now something was changing. A little blind girl had walked up to his gate and handed him a letter from the past. A letter that told him life wasn't over yet. He looked up at the night sky. Clouds parted slowly, revealing a single bright star. Samuel whispered into the quiet, "You always did know how to find a way back to me, Clara." And somewhere deep inside, a long-forgotten warmth began to grow again. The next morning came with a sky full of pale light and the smell of wet earth. Samuel woke early like he always did, but something was different. The letter still rested on his bedside table, right next to the photo of Clara and little Matthew. He had read it so many times during the night that he could almost hear her voice whispering those words. Someone will need your kindness one day. Those words kept circling in his mind like a wind that never stopped. He got out of bed, put on his worn boots, and stepped outside. The ranch looked the same as it had for years. Fences standing, grass damp with dew, horses waiting for their feed. But it didn't feel the same anymore. The silence didn't seem as heavy. Even the windmill's creak sounded softer, almost friendly. Samuel worked through the morning like always, but his thoughts were somewhere else. Every small sound reminded him of the girl, the careful tap of her walking stick, the way she smiled even though she couldn't see him, the calm tone in her young voice. He found himself looking down the long dirt road more than once, wondering if she might come again. At noon, he went inside to eat a little bread and stew. He sat at the table, reading the letter again. He had never been a man of words, but Clara's writing spoke right into his heart. The paper was fragile, yellowed with age, yet it carried more warmth than the fire burning in his stove. That afternoon, while he was fixing a broken hinge on the barn door, he heard a familiar voice calling from the gate. "Mr. Hayes?" He turned quickly, and there she was, Emily, standing with her stick and the same small smile. His chest filled with something that almost felt like joy. He walked toward her, surprised but glad. "Emily," he said, "you came back." "I told you I would," she said proudly. "I wanted to know if the letter made you smile." He chuckled softly. "I'm not sure yet, but it did something." "Something good?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes," he said after a pause. "Something good." He opened the gate and helped her in again. This time she seemed to know the way, tapping the ground lightly until she reached the porch. He brought her a glass of milk and a cookie from a tin he hadn't touched in years. She sat comfortably, her feet swinging above the floorboards. They talked for a while, about simple things. She told him she liked the smell of rain and the way wind felt on her face. He listened, amazed at how she spoke about the world she couldn't see as if she knew it better than anyone. He found himself talking too, telling her about the horses and how his wife used to name every calf that was born. Emily laughed softly. "You must miss her a lot," she said. Samuel nodded. "Every day. But she must be happy now," Emily said. "You kept her letter safe. That means her words didn't get lost." That struck him deeply. He had never thought about it that way. Maybe the letter wasn't just meant for him. It was a bridge between what was lost and what was still living. After a long pause, Emily said, "Can I ask something, Mr. Hayes?" "Of course. Can I meet the horses?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Sure, come on." He guided her to the barn, letting her hold his arm. The smell of hay filled the air, and one of the horses whinnied softly. Emily reached out a cautious hand, and Samuel took it, helping her touch the horse's muzzle. She gasped in delight. "He's warm," she said. "And his nose feels funny." Samuel laughed, the sound startling even himself. "That's Duke. He's old and grumpy, but he likes company." "Hi, Duke," Emily whispered, patting the horse gently. "You're a good boy." The horse lowered his head, and she giggled. It had been so long since laughter had filled that barn that Samuel almost didn't recognize the sound. He felt something melt inside him, something that had been frozen for 2 decades. They stayed in the barn for hours. Samuel told her about each horse, how he had raised them since they were foals, how his son used to ride the youngest one before the storm. Emily listened with care, nodding now and then, her fingers brushing against the hay and wood. At one point, she turned toward him and said softly, "You talk about your son with love. You still carry him in your words." Samuel's throat tightened. He was a good boy, brave like his mother. "Then he's not gone," she said. "He's still with you." Those words were simple, but they struck him like lightning. He had spent so long believing everything he loved had vanished. But now, for the first time, he felt maybe that wasn't true. Maybe love didn't disappear. It just waited quietly until someone reminded you it was still there. When the sun started to go down, Samuel walked Emily back to the road. She stopped at the gate and said, "You're smiling now." He touched his face, surprised to realize she was right. He hadn't even noticed. "I guess I am," he said quietly. "That makes me happy," she said. "Mama says when people smile again after a long time, angels smile too." He chuckled and said, "Your mama says a lot of smart things." "She does. You should meet her sometime," Emily said. She bakes the best bread in the county." "I'll hold you to that," Samuel said. "But next time you come, I'll make pie." "Deal?" "Deal," she said cheerfully. He watched her leave again, her walking stick tapping softly against the ground. When she was gone, the ranch didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt alive, filled with her voice, her laughter, and the memory of that small smile she'd brought back to him. That night, Samuel built a fire and sat with a notebook he hadn't used in years. He began writing, slow, careful words that came straight from his heart. He wrote about Clara, about Matthew, and about Emily, the little girl who had walked through his gate and changed everything. He wrote, "She cannot see the world, yet she brings light to it. I thought I was finished with life, but maybe life wasn't finished with me." He closed the notebook and looked out the window. The stars were bright, scattered across the black sky. Somewhere in that vast silence, he felt Clara's presence again, not as pain, but as comfort. Before going to bed, he whispered softly, "You were right, Clara. Someone did need my kindness." And for the first time in 20 years, when he turned off the lamp and lay down, he didn't fall asleep to loneliness. He fell asleep to peace. The following week passed quietly on the ranch, but the air felt different now. Samuel found himself waking up with a little more purpose each morning. The first thing he did every day was glance at the letter on his nightstand. It had become something sacred to him, a reminder that maybe life hadn't abandoned him completely. The horses seemed livelier too. Maybe it was because Samuel started talking to them again, just as he used to years ago. He would pat their necks, tell them about the weather, and sometimes even laugh when one of them snorted in response. The barn no longer felt like a tomb filled with old memories. It felt like a home once more. Each evening he would sit on the porch watching the sunset while holding his mug of coffee. The horizon still stretched endlessly, but it didn't make him feel as lonely anymore. Somewhere out there, a little blind girl was probably walking home, talking to her mother, maybe even laughing. That thought alone made him smile. A few days later, as Samuel was repairing the fence near the creek, he heard that familiar tapping sound again. He looked up to see Emily making her careful way toward him. Her small walking stick touched each rock, and she smiled when she heard the creek flowing nearby. "Mr. Hayes," she called. Samuel grinned. "Well, I'll be." "You found me again," she giggled. "I told you I would, and I brought something for you." She held up a small cloth bag tied with a red ribbon. Samuel took it and opened it carefully. Inside were 2 slices of freshly baked bread. The smell of butter and sweetness filled the air. "My mama made it," Emily said proudly. "She said you needed to taste something made with love." Samuel chuckled softly. "You and your mama are quite a pair." He tore a small piece and tasted it. It was warm and soft, simple but full of care. "You tell her this is the best bread I've had in years," he said. Emily smiled. "She'll be happy to hear that. She says kindness always tastes better when shared." Samuel's chest felt warm. She's right. They sat on a log by the fence, listening to the water and the wind. Emily tilted her head toward the sound of the creek. "It sounds like it's laughing," she said. "Laughing?" Samuel repeated, smiling. "Yes," she said seriously. "When water moves fast and hits rocks, it sounds like it's giggling. Mama says even rivers are happy when the world is alive." Samuel looked at the water, really listening this time, and she was right, it did sound like soft laughter. He nodded slowly. "You have a way of seeing things, Emily, even without your eyes," she grinned. "Mama says the heart can see farther than eyes ever can." He stared at her for a long time. There was wisdom in that small girl's words, something pure and unshaken by the world's troubles. She reminded him of Clara in a way, her gentleness, her courage, her quiet faith. They talked for hours that day. Samuel told her about life on the ranch, how his wife had loved the garden, how his son used to chase chickens around the yard until Clara laughed so hard she cried. Emily listened closely, her face soft and peaceful. When the sun began to lower, she asked, "Do you still have her garden?" Samuel glanced toward the empty patch beside the porch. "Not anymore. It's just weeds now." "Maybe we could fix it," she said suddenly. "Mama says flowers don't just grow from seeds. They grow from care." Samuel hesitated, looking at the overgrown patch. He hadn't touched that place in 2 decades. It felt like disturbing a grave. But when he saw the hope on Emily's face, something inside him shifted. "All right," he said finally. "We'll fix it." The next morning, he started clearing the weeds, cutting away dead roots and turning the dry soil. It was hard work, but it made him feel alive again. When Emily came the next day, She brought a small bag of flower seeds her mother had given her. She said, "These are wild daisies," Emily said, holding the bag carefully. "They grow even when no one thinks they will." Samuel smiled faintly. "Sounds like you." Together they planted the seeds. Emily couldn't see the ground, but she felt where the soil was soft and pressed each seed in with her tiny hands. Samuel guided her gently, careful not to let her fall. The two of them worked side by side under the sun, and for the first time in 20 years the ranch echoed with laughter again. When they finished, Emily wiped her hands on her dress. "Now we wait," she said. Samuel nodded. We wait. Days passed. Samuel watered the garden every morning. Even though nothing had sprouted yet, he kept talking to the soil, telling it about his day, about Emily's stories, about the letter that had changed his life. It became a kind of prayer, one that gave him strength. One afternoon, Emily arrived again carrying her walking stick and a folded piece of paper. "Mama helped me write something," she said. "I wanted to read it to you." She sat on the porch, the paper in her small hands, and began to read slowly, her voice soft but clear. "Sometimes people carry sadness like a heavy coat. They forget how warm the sun feels. But if even one person offers kindness, the coat gets lighter. Maybe it doesn't disappear, but the heart learns to breathe again." When she finished, she smiled shyly. "Do you like it?" Samuel's voice trembled a little. "I love it, Emily. More than you can imagine." She folded the paper and gave it to him. "Keep it so you don't forget how it sounds." He took it gently, his rough hands trembling slightly. "Thank you." After she left that evening, Samuel read the note again under the fading light. Then he placed it next to Clara's letter on the nightstand. The two pieces of paper looked so different, one old and yellowed, the other new and white, but somehow they belonged together. One spoke from the past, the other from the present, both reminding him that love could survive time and silence. A week later, the first green shoots appeared in the garden. Small, fragile, but alive. Samuel smiled when he saw them, his eyes watering. He whispered softly, "You were right, Emily. They do grow when cared for." That same afternoon, he saddled one of his horses and rode into town for the first time in years. People stared when he passed by, surprised to see him again. He stopped at the bakery and asked for Emily's mother. A kind woman with soft brown hair came out, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Anna," she said. "You must be Mr. Hayes. Emily talks about you all the time." Samuel smiled warmly. "She's a remarkable girl. I wanted to thank you for the bread and for raising someone so special." Anna's eyes softened. She said, "You smile now." "That's thanks enough," Samuel chuckled. "She's the reason I remembered how." When he returned home that evening, the sunset painted the sky orange and pink. The wind was gentle, carrying the faint scent of new blossoms from the garden. Samuel sat on the porch looking at the little patch of earth they had worked on together. He realized then that his world had changed in ways he couldn't explain. The loneliness that had lived in his heart for 2 decades had finally loosened its grip, all because a blind girl with a letter had walked into his life and shown him how to see again, without using eyes at all. That night, he sat down to write one more entry in his notebook. He wrote, "Healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in small steps. A voice, a seed, a letter, a child's smile. The pain never disappears, but love grows around it until the hurt is softer." And when he closed the notebook, Samuel realized something he never thought possible. He was finally looking forward to tomorrow. Winter rolled in slowly that year, covering the Wyoming plains in soft layers of white. The mornings were colder, and the wind carried a sharp chill that bit through even the thickest coat. But for Samuel Hayes, the ranch no longer felt like a lonely, frozen world. There was warmth now, small but steady, like a candle that refused to go out. Every time he looked at the garden, now asleep under the snow, he thought of Emily and her laughter. The flowers they had planted had grown strong before winter arrived, and he had carefully covered them with straw and soil to protect them from the frost. Samuel had started keeping a small journal, something he had never done before. Each night before bed, he wrote about the day, the weather, the horses, and most often the little blind girl who had changed everything. His handwriting was shaky, but the words came from deep inside. Sometimes when the wind howled outside, he would read Clara's letter again, then Emily's poem, and it felt like both of them were speaking to him. One from the past, one from the present. The days passed quietly. until one morning Samuel heard the faint sound of someone calling his name. He stepped outside, his breath fogging in the cold air, and there she was, Emily, wrapped in a heavy coat and scarf, her walking stick tapping gently against the frozen ground. Her mother, Anna, walked beside her holding her arm. "Mr. Hayes," Emily called, her voice bright even in the cold air. Samuel smiled widely. "Well, look who's come visiting in the snow." Anna waved politely as they reached the porch. "We didn't mean to intrude, Mr. Hayes," she said, "but Emily insisted on bringing you something." "You're never intruding," Samuel said warmly. He helped Emily up the steps and guided her to the same chair she always sat in. Emily grinned as she held out a small wooden box tied with a string. "Open it," she said eagerly. Samuel untied the string and lifted the lid. Inside was a small wooden heart, carved carefully and polished smooth. On the surface were a few words written in delicate letters. "Thank you for showing me how to see the world." Samuel froze, his rough hands trembling slightly as he read it. "You made this?" he asked softly. "I told my friend from town how I feel," Emily said proudly. "He helped carve it for me. I wanted you to have it." Samuel's voice broke a little. "It's beautiful, Emily." She tilted her head. "Does it make you happy?" He swallowed hard and nodded. "More than you can imagine." Emily reached out and placed her small hand over his. "Then you have to promise me something." "What's that?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Promise you'll never stop smiling again," she said. "Because it makes the world brighter when you do." Samuel couldn't help it. He laughed softly, the sound mixed with emotion. "I'll try my best, sweetheart." Anna smiled quietly at the sight. "She's been talking about this visit all week," she said. "She said you needed a gift to remember her by." Samuel looked at the little wooden heart again, the words glowing softly in the light from the fireplace. "I won't ever forget," he said firmly. "You've given me more than a gift. You've given me back my life." Anna's eyes shimmered and she looked away quickly. "You've given her a gift too," she said. "Emily never had a friend like you, someone who treated her like she could do anything." Samuel turned to the girl beside him, who was now humming softly, her face peaceful. "She's done more for me than she'll ever know." The three of them shared dinner that evening, fresh bread, stew, and laughter that filled the old ranch house like sunlight breaking through clouds. The walls that once echoed only silence now carried the sound of conversation, the warmth of family. Samuel hadn't realized how much he had missed that feeling until it returned. As the night grew colder, Anna stood to leave. Samuel offered to walk them halfway down the road, holding a lantern high to light the way. The snow crunched softly under their boots. When they reached the fence, Emily turned to face him. "Will we see you again soon?" she asked. Samuel smiled. "You can count on it. I'll visit once the snow clears," she grinned. "Then I'll bake you a pie with Mama." "I'll hold you to that," he said warmly. When they left, Samuel stood for a long time, watching their lantern light fade into the distance. He felt the cold on his face, but inside he was warm. The night sky was full of stars, and for once he didn't feel like they were too far away. Days passed and winter deepened. Snow piled high on the fences, and the horses stayed close to the barn. Samuel spent his days mending tools, writing, and tending to the animals. But each night before sleeping, he held the wooden heart and smiled. Then one morning, near the end of winter, he saw something small but bright, a patch of green near the porch. He bent down and brushed away the snow, and there it was, the first daisy sprouting through the frost. His heart swelled as he remembered Emily's words. They grow even when no one thinks they will. He spent the next few days caring for that little flower, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. When spring finally came, dozens more followed. The garden bloomed again, yellow, white, and pink blossoms waving in the breeze. It was the same place where Clara had once planted her flowers, but now it carried new life, new meaning. That spring, Samuel rode into town again, just like he had promised. He brought a small basket of wild daisies for Emily and her mother. When he arrived at their home, Anna opened the door and smiled. "Mr. Hayes, Emily will be so happy to see you." Inside, Emily was sitting by the window humming quietly. When she heard his boots on the floor, her face lit up. "Mr. Hayes, you came." "I told you I would," he said with a grin. "And I brought you something." He placed the basket in her lap. She touched the flowers gently, her fingers brushing over the petals. "They're alive," she whispered. "You did it." "No," he said softly. "We did it." She smiled, holding one of the daisies close. "They smell like sunshine." Samuel laughed, feeling the warmth in her words. "They smell like hope, Emily, and that's what you gave me." She reached for his hand again. "Then we're even." He shook his head. "Not even close." That day Samuel stayed for hours. They talked, laughed, and shared stories while the sun shone through the window. It felt like family, something he thought he would never have again. When he returned home that evening, he placed one of the daisies on Clara's photo beside the letter and Emily's poem. Then he set the wooden heart in front of them. The table looked like an altar of memories, past, present, and the promise of tomorrow. He sat down on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with orange and gold. The same horizon that had once brought him pain now brought him peace. The wind carried the faint scent of blooming flowers, and he could almost hear Clara's laugh again, soft, distant, and full of love. Samuel smiled. It wasn't a small, fleeting smile, but a real one, warm, strong, and full of life. The kind of smile he thought he had lost forever. Some evenings later, the townsfolk saw him riding into town, waving at children, greeting old friends, and even helping repair the church roof. People whispered in wonder, saying, "The old rancher's smiling again." They didn't know the full story. They didn't know about the letter, or the blind girl, or the garden that grew from hope. But they saw the change. And on one quiet evening, as the stars appeared over the plains, Samuel sat on his porch holding the wooden heart. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Clara, and thank you, Emily." The wind blew softly through the grass, almost as if answering him. For 20 years, Samuel Hayes had lived in silence. But now there was laughter in his home, peace in his heart, and a smile on his face. All because one little blind girl had found her way to his gate, with a letter that carried love across time.